Hi, and welcome to LinkedIn for Entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Julia Zata, a LinkedIn strategist and ghostwriter, and lover of all things practical when it comes to visibility strategies. This podcast is for service-based business owners who want to build their brand on LinkedIn, attract new clients, collaborators, and speaking engagements without overthinking every post or sounding like a corporate robot. And yes, we're going to keep it actionable and fun. Let's dive in. Today, I'm going to talk about 5 top mistakes founders make on LinkedIn that weaken their brand. And I say this as a LinkedIn ghostwriter working for founders, for senior leaders, for entrepreneurs. These are the typical mistakes I see all the time. And I'm going to also tell you how to correct them. Now, I'd like you to be mindful of the fact that we all make these mistakes at one point or another, especially if we're curating our own content. So it's nothing to feel ashamed about. It's just an opportunity to learn how to improve your copywriting, because all these mistakes fundamentally are related to copywriting. And so I'd like to break them down one by one so you can analyze your own content and see which pieces need to be improved. The first mistake I'm going to call out is using vague language, buzzwords, or industry jargon. This is such an easy pitfall for all of us because we are inside our business, and so we are used to certain technical language and concepts that for us are so obvious now because we've been doing this for a while, that we forget that our target audience is probably unfamiliar with some of the terminology, with some of the concepts. And so when we use this kind of language, what we do is we unintentionally alienate them. And at the same time, we're attracting our industry peers, our colleagues, our competitors, because we're speaking insider language, right? So we want to always look at our content from the perspective of our target audience and think about whether or not the words that we're using are familiar to them, or if we need to switch up our language so that they can more easily relate to it. And I have some examples for you. One of my clients is a pain recovery coach, and one of the catchphrases that she uses all the time is healing journey, which is great because that's what she helps people embark on. But the issue with this is that healing journey is a keyword that her target audience is not searching for. Her target audience struggle with chronic pain, neuropathic pain, different types of pain. And so they're going to be searching for information around chronic pain rather than healing journey. So what I've been doing as I work with her is to make sure that in the body of her content and the wording that I put down in her LinkedIn posts, I'm always using the keywords that her target audience are going to relate to. And any type of buzzwords that they might be unfamiliar with, I change them up so that they're explained in more just everyday normal language, so as not to alienate them. Another example, totally different industry, is I started working with a corporate client. This is a company, and I'm working with a few of the senior leaders to help build a personal brand. And the situation here is that this company has an amazing track record, but the way that they present themselves on LinkedIn, also on their website, and in the briefings that they hand over to me, is the issue here is that the language is very vague. There's a lot of industry jargon, a lot of buzzwords that on the surface sound amazing, but actually when you're trying to understand what does this mean, it's really vague. And so with them, I've been working diligently to ground these high-level concepts down into very practical examples so that anybody who's scanning their feed and lands on their content understands what they're about without putting a lot of thought into it. And so when you think about the language that you use in your content, one of the easiest ways to look at it is to think about, okay, like, what is my target audience searching for in Google, in ChatGPT, and whatever searchable tools that they're using, even TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn? What keywords would they be looking for? What keywords would grab their attention? And then use those in your content to speak to them rather than to speak from your perspective. All right, moving on to mistake number 2, talking about what's relevant to you and not your audience. This is another super common one, and it's because when you're thinking about what to post on your personal profile on LinkedIn, which is very much a reflection of who you are as a person, you want to share topics that you're passionate about, but that doesn't mean that it's relevant to your audience. So I see this all the time with my clients, like they feel very excited or passionate about something that happened in their business and they want to talk about it on LinkedIn. But the issue is that oftentimes when they come to me with these content ideas, they're describing situations that are relevant to them and that are meaningful to them as the service provider rather than situations that are extremely meaningful or impactful for their target audience, right? So, for example, I have a client who is a business coach, and he will often comment on the dynamics that he observes when he's talking to leadership teams and coaching them. But the dynamics that he wants to describe are often things that his industry peers would love to riff on and would totally relate to, but they're dynamics that his target audience wouldn't understand because they haven't begun that process yet. So it's examples that would totally go over their heads. And this applies to everyone, everywhere. I see this all the time. Founders, senior leaders, they want to talk about what lights them up, what they're passionate about. And because they're highly intelligent, they have lots of different interests. The problem with this is that it can easily alienate their audience because if they talk about situations that their audience can't relate to or topics that their audience isn't even interested in, instead of presenting themselves as an industry leader and somebody who's driving change for a certain specific audience, they become just a person talking about themselves and they lose their audience's interest fast. So I'd like you to reflect on, what kind of content are you putting out there? The pattern that I see that I've experienced myself is that you feel very excited about something or something happened. You're like, wow, this is so meaningful. I want to talk about it. But if you think about it for a little bit longer and ask yourself, well, how is this meaningful or impactful to my target audience? Oftentimes you'll find that it's really not. It's more about you and your target audience. They're really more interested in what you can do for them, right? So there's an acronym that's often used in copywriting, WIIFM, what's in it for me? And that's the perspective that your audience is looking at your posts from. So if you're not able to give them something that's valuable to them, they're likely not interested. So you always have to look at your content from their perspective before you hit post. Now we're going to go into mistake number 3. This is about describing the solution too soon. Here we are jumping into solving your audience's problem without having laid out the foundations of what exactly is the problem. And so the issue with this is that even though the content is valuable and relevant to your target audience, you're putting the cart in front of the horse. You're not thinking about where your audience is at right now. You're not meeting them where they're at. You're meeting them like 3 steps ahead, so it misses the mark. An example of this would be offering mindset tips for senior leaders without actually explaining why these mindset tips are important. Why should you even pay attention to your mindset as a senior leader? I follow somebody who often makes this mistake of jumping the gun, going straight into the solution and offering advice as a career coach, but they don't spend enough time priming their audience to understand why this advice is important to them. So the way that you address this is by thinking about when you start working with a client, how do you get them involved in their coaching process? As a coach or as a consultant, you first explain why the changes that you're going to make are important before you go into explaining what those changes are and how to achieve them. So in your content, you really want to speak a lot about the why rather than the how. So the how would be the solution, but the why is meeting people where they are when they see your content. So if we go back to the example of a career coach, instead of saying as a career coach, these are the most important mindset tips that I share with all my clients. You would start with, here's why mindset is so important when you're transitioning or pivoting in your career. And I say this as somebody who has X amount of years in the field. This is the dynamic that I've noticed, right? And so you go into why this is important to your audience rather than what they should do, because they're not going to listen to the what or to the how until they understand why this is even relevant to them. So you always want to meet your audience where they are at. And when they're scrolling on LinkedIn, they are not actively looking for a solution to a problem. They're just scrolling, looking for entertainment or something interesting to read during work breaks. They're not on Google searching for a solution to a problem. So you have to capture their attention from the perspective that they might not even be aware that they have a problem, or that their awareness of their problem is very surface level. They haven't given it much thought yet. So you have to grab their attention there before you can move them forward. Mistake number 4 that I notice often when working with clients is that they tend to write really long-winded posts that read like blog articles more than social media posts. And this is because, in my experience, founders, senior leaders, they're used to giving presentations. And so they're used to being long-winded about what they do and the problems that they solve. And so when they sit down to write a LinkedIn post, they will adopt that same mentality. But what happens is that their posts end up being too long. Not only that, they end up using words that are a little bit too complex and sentence structures that are complex. And so there is a free app called Hemingway app that will grade your content based on how complex it is to read and then suggest ways that you can make it simpler. And the reason for this isn't that your audience is unintelligent. It's because the way that we consume content on a social media feed is we like to skim read and, quickly get value from what we're consuming. We're not prepared mentally to sit down and read a blog post. And so when we're writing content for our audience, we need to make it very digestible, which means keeping our posts short, so less than 200 words, and making sure that the difficulty of the content is low. So on the Hemingway app, they will tell you what the grade level of your content is. Like, is it 5th grade level? Is it 7th grade level? Is it 11th grade level? And so the higher the number, the more difficult that content is to read and absorb on social media. So you want to keep it as simple as possible. And then mistake number 5, the very last mistake I'm going to mention today, is not posting at all. Now, we've talked about a lot of different mistakes that we make when we write, but the biggest mistake of all is not posting, because if we're not sharing, we're invisible. And I see this all the time. There's a lot of just amazing people out there who are having an impact on the businesses that they touch, but if they're not posting about it, it's almost as if they didn't exist. And we want to avoid becoming our industry's best kept secret. We want to make sure that people know us, they know what we're doing, and they know how we're doing it, who we're doing it with, and what's happening in our business. And as an example, I've just started working with a client who in the past has invested heavily in ads, which gave no ROI on LinkedIn. And it's not because the ads don't work. Ads are extremely effective, in fact, but if you don't have a brand to back up those ads, they're not going to have the results you want them to. When people are looking to buy a product or service, they'll also want to see who they're buying it from. And so if you're running ads before you build a brand, people aren't going to be able to see anything about you from a personal brand perspective. This is an issue because people buy based on trust. And if you haven't created any brand equity, no trust, then it's a lot harder to sell. So all that to say that it's very important to build your personal brand, to post organically, to share your journey, to share what you do, to share who you help, to talk about the impact that you have, your values, your company culture, so that when people look for you online, they can find you and be able to form an opinion about you because you've created plenty of content to make that possible for them. So we're coming to the end of this episode. If you're listening and thinking, yeah, I might be making a few of these mistakes, maybe even all of them, I'd love to help you fix them. I offer a 30-minute LinkedIn visibility call that's free. We'll take a look at your profile, your content, and you'll walk away with tailored advice on what to adjust so you can start showing up in a more impactful way. There's a link to book a call with me in the show notes. I'd love to hear how this episode landed for you. And if you have any suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to know what your thoughts are. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or any of the other social media platforms that I'm active on. You'll find the link in the show notes to those as well. And I will talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in to LinkedIn for Entrepreneurs. If you found this episode helpful, please share it on LinkedIn or on your favorite social media platform. And if you really want to make my day, leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps more business owners find this show. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.